Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Callum Hale-Thomson, founder of the art tech company First Thursday, a platform for commercial galleries that helps teams surface insights, streamline sales, and strengthen collector relationships. In this episode, Callum shares what sparked his interest in the art world and the origins of First Thursday, how it was born in early 2024, how it's evolved since then in such a short time span, and the unique perspective it offers to art businesses like contemporary art galleries. We talk about how problematic art fairs are, but also how they positively contribute to the art ecosystem. Plus, we dive into the role of AI in the art industry, how it's transforming workflows, and what it means for galleries and art businesses today. Callum shares his insights on navigating industry challenges, especially as a startup in a traditionally quite tech-phobic space. Thank you, Callum, for coming on the podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the art world tech gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. All right, welcome to the podcast, Callum. Can you start us off by telling me about your background and what got you interested in the art industry?
For sure. So I often like to say, I think it was inevitable that I would somehow end up here. Both my parents are artists. My dad's a portrait painter. My mum is a printmaker. But growing up, I couldn't draw, didn't have any artistic talent, and always felt like I was going to do something else. As a child, I was always super confused about how my parents ever made a living in the art world. It's one of the biggest questions I asked myself.
As I think a lot of people ask themselves.
And so I actually went to university to study literature, briefly toyed with becoming an academic, and then found myself in startups. But this interest in the art world, the interest in its economic practices, how it functions, always kind of stayed with me. And I, through friends and through networking, ended up working with a group of artists around the time of the pandemic, supporting them with building websites, with helping them find collectors, with building databases of email contacts and people they might want to sell their work to. And this started to get me interested in the idea that there could be a way of bringing these two worlds together. This interest I had in startups and technology and the real problems facing artists and other participants in the art industry as well.
Yeah. I was actually speaking to someone recently. I was interviewing them for a project that I'm working on that I can't really say too much about on the podcast yet. But I was talking to them. They work for a tech company over in the US, but they work as an artist, sort of, not as an artist, they work as a curator, basically, or sort of as a curator in their research department. And what this person was telling me was that they find it really interesting to look at how like forward-thinking sort of think tank startup mindsets are really similar to this artist mindset of looking towards the future, thinking in alternative ways, not having a really linear thought process. And I found that so interesting because normally I wouldn't think that these two worlds could be easily bridged, but oh, how wrong I've been. So Callum, I want to ask you to, set the tone further because we're going to be talking about this more in depth during the episode. What is First Thursday? How did you arrive at the concept and how has it iterated and developed since you founded it in early 2024?
Absolutely. A big question. So We call First Thursday a collector intelligence platform, which is going to require a little bit of unpacking. It's a new term. But in short, it's a platform that helps galleries to meet, nurture relationships with, and ultimately make sales to new collectors. And the concept behind it is to really look at how the art world fundamentally is probably one of the most relationship-driven industries in the world at every stage of the industry. And yet, if you go around to all the places where artists are meeting gallerists, gallerists are meeting collectors, where so much of the transaction value of the art world is actually taking place, the systems and the tools and the ways in which these interactions are happening are very analog. In many cases, I guess in the olden days, and maybe even still today, a lot of these things are happening inside people's heads, right? There are art dealers who have encyclopedic memories of all their best collectors, what their interests, their likes, everything like that. What really fascinated me when I was thinking about setting up a business in the art world was to think about how the pressures and challenges faced by these dealers and gallerists have really transformed over the past few years, in many parts enabled by a more globalized world, but also by technology. And so maybe 20 years ago, where you had galleries who were pretty reliant on walk-ins, maybe introductions from other collectors and friends for all of their sales, today you have galleries who are maybe relying on 5, 10, 15 different channels and avenues to meet new people. Some of those are what we know and love, right? It's openings, it's having actual brilliant exhibitions, great programming. Some of it is social media, which is very new for many galleries. Some of it is online marketplaces like Artsy, like ArtNet, which have grown massively in the last 20 years. And then, of course, art fairs, which I'm sure we'll talk about in greater depth later on, which, again, have gone from being a small part of the, I guess, sales mix of a commercial art gallery into a key driver of revenue. And so when you look at how these transactions happen today, and you think about the challenges those dealers face, right? They're dealing with people with varying different levels of information. Someone DMing you on Instagram and saying, I like this artist, you have much less intel on them versus, an introduction from your best collector to their best friend who wants to buy from you. It's an incredibly difficult job. And I have a lot of respect for dealers who have to face these sorts of challenges. And so what we're trying to build with First Thursday is a way to succeed in this modern era where dealers are under more challenges than ever, where there's more economic pressures to attend fairs, to pay for platforms, to find new buyers, and where you can't afford to do what was done in the past, really, which is sit back, rely on your memory, rely on analog tools like pen and paper and notebooks to do all of the business.
Yeah. I mean, thinking back to when I was working in galleries, when we would get the books that were scanned in from the art fairs, from the people, like the directors would take pictures and would send the PDF of like all these pictures, and then someone would have to manually input that into our system. And then, of course, a gallery assistant might be tasked with researching someone who isn't really known to us. If someone isn't in our database already, who is this person and whatnot? And I think a lot can possibly, number one, it takes a ton of time, a lot of resources that could be better used elsewhere. And number two, a lot of things can get missed. A lot of people don't get followed up with, even though that could lead to a sale. And I think that that's really valuable. What did you call the platform again that you said was a new term?
We're calling it a collector intelligence platform.
A collector intelligence platform. I like it. Okay. And, you did just touch on art fairs. And so I do want to continue the conversation with this. Art fairs are, in some circles, kind of a touchy subject in the art world, especially as of late. There's been a lot of conversation about, is it worth it? Are they here to stay? And all of this. What have you learned in the last year or so about how galleries function within that model? Because I feel like you have a very unique perspective as a sort of outsider with a lot of insider observations. Like, you're not a gallerist yourself, but you're seeing these problems, you're seeing how they function. And so, number one, to kind of talk about what you've observed in terms of how these galleries function, as well as sort of maybe some of the things that you've seen that you're like, this is a problem, or this could be done better, or maybe something you find really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe it's useful to start with my first impressions, because when I was working in startups and when I was growing up, I knew about Frieze, about Art Basel. I think, went along to a few editions because I grew up in East London. And again, you never really question what's going on behind the scenes. As a visitor, not a buyer to an art fair, you can go and enjoy the work. You can feel a little bit out of place, maybe have a beer, enjoy yourself. And when I started working very closely with galleries, especially those that were attending multiple art fairs a year, it's a really eye-opening moment for me. Mostly because my take is that attending art fairs for most galleries has gone from an optional add-on, something that was a nice way of bringing your audience to a wider group of people, meeting new collectors, to an essential part of what it means to build, develop, and grow a commercial art gallery. It's no longer an optional thing that you can do as kind of, a sweetener to increase your numbers at the end of the year, or something you can do when you've made an amount of profit. And I think you can just look at, I was reading Tim Schneider's newsletter recently about how he did 12 New York art fairs in like 72 hours.
Oh my God, that was wild. I read that too, yeah.
And I was there in New York, and I think I didn't do 12. I think maybe I did 8 or 9.
Yeah.
But when you have that number of art fairs in one place at one given time who are all trying to target, maybe not the same people, but a certain subset of the art buying public, and where all those art fairs are also targeting galleries that feed neatly into different segments, right? The blue chip at Frieze down to the artist-led fairs that were happening there. You realize that there's just not enough people going around to really make all these work. And, one of the saddest things I saw in New York was going around these fairs that were in some cases quite empty on the public days, and where there were dealers and in some cases artists who were there, saying, we've spent all this money, we've spent tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, pounds, whatever, on attending this. It's a huge deal for us. We've been told it's going to make a big difference. And, all the people are at Frieze, or they're at this other fair, or they're kind of not coming to us today. And I think we've really got to this very interesting point in the art fair dynamic where, in 2000, there probably were 100 fairs globally, maybe fewer. There are now 300 plus that occur every year on the major scene. And so with that number of fairs, with that amount of economic requirement for galleries to participate, I think it's becoming a really difficult place to be a gallery who wants to grow and develop their base. I think that the side that I'm really interested in is from a first principles standpoint, again, using when I worked in startups, the concept of a fair is really smart. You're a London-based gallery. You're competing with every London-based gallery for your clientele. You're trying to differentiate yourself based on programming, based on price point, whatever. Take your gallery for a week to New York and you can suddenly meet, the world's biggest art buying audience. It sounds amazing. The dream is incredible. The reality, I think, because of what I've just said, because of the volume of fairs, because of the limited number of attendees, all that sort of stuff, I think is starting to come home. And I think we're seeing more and more galleries decide to either forego attending art fairs altogether, or ones who are slimming down their participation and really starting to think about return on investment and where they actually place their chips and where they go.
Yeah. I found something really interesting. I was speaking to a wonderful Los Angeles-based gallery, Moskowitz Bays. And I was very surprised that it was right after I came back from New York. So it was the end of May. And I was surprised to see them. They were doing a pop-up for a whole month or a month and a half. They were doing a full-on exhibition in a space in East London. And I was speaking to them and I was like, why did you decide to do this? Were you in New York? Did you do any of the fairs? Are you going to do any of the fairs? And they were like, this is kind of what we're doing instead of a fair. Because they had an artist on their roster based in London, creating the works in London. They didn't want to pay the import and the shipping of all of these works to LA. I'm sure that they would have, but they thought,
of course,
all of her, the artists, all of her community, her collectors, her network, everything is in London. So why don't they take the plunge? It's cheaper to rent out a space for a month and a half to do the exhibition and to have this high quality thing. It's better for the artist in some cases. It's, great for her community. It's also, if you think about it depends on where the art fair is taking place, but if you think about import, export, all of these sorts of taxes and costs, it's okay, wow, this is actually a really interesting alternative to thinking about, yes, they have a brick and mortar space in Los Angeles, but then they have this sort of nomadic idea going on that replaced the idea of an art fair for them. And they said it went really well.
I'm sure. I think it's a really interesting concept. And yeah, I'm glad more and more galleries are starting to do it. I recently, when I was in New York for Art Week, Angelica Jopling from Incubator had also rented a space in Chinatown.
Oh yeah, I didn't get to make it to that.
And it was, the openings there were phenomenal. It was really buzzy. It was really exciting. And I think, we're definitely seeing more and more of that.
That's so cool.
Exactly. I think what's really interesting about it is if you go, so if we wind back to I guess how galleries were viewing art fairs maybe even 10, 15 years ago, where the cost of participation was significantly less and maybe the volume of participation, there was less of this ongoing engine of you have to attend 5, 10 fairs a year to keep going.
Just sorry to interrupt you, but for anyone who maybe doesn't know how much an art fair can cost, do you have those numbers in your, do you know?
It can vary massively. Yeah. So there are surprisingly inexpensive fairs that you can participate in. But if you're looking at, I think there's some public data from Art Basel showing their booths can go anywhere from the kind of early to mid tens of thousands of Swiss francs, basically pounds, up to 120, 150,000 for a single booth. And
some of those big booths are Yeah.
And that doesn't count, you have to fly your team there in many cases. You have to pay import-export fees, any add-ons. You want power on your booth. That's a common one that galleries forget to pay for. That's probably going to be an extra grand. So it can very quickly become a very, very expensive.
Yeah, this extra power socket will be £600, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a huge cost for the gallery. But I think if you look back to why galleries are doing this in the first place, what was nice about the fair model was it was a way of de-risking the investment, because you were doing sales, right? You were going and meeting new collectors, but you were also bringing an artist into a new market, which has a huge amount of value for that artist and for the gallery. And you were also more generally expanding your collector network. You were going to dinners, you were introducing people to your brand. And because the cost of participation maybe 20, 30 years ago was so much less, you were in a position where it was possible to see this almost as like a cost of marketing, of relationship building. The problem now, I would say, is because the cost of participation in certain circles is so high, galleries are being forced to really think about pure return on investment based on sales. And this has really interesting effects all the way down the food chain, right? You have galleries who maybe are bringing less exciting programming because they want to bring things they're going to sell.
Yeah, playing it safe.
Absolutely. You have galleries who are treating these fairs as make or break, because if you don't hit the magical 2x figure of what you paid for the booth, then you're underwater immediately.
Yeah.
And I think galleries who think about alternate approaches, I think are really exciting, especially doing your own premises. The other model I'm seeing recently, which I'm a huge fan of, is I don't know what the term is for it, almost more, salon style art fair. So examples of this would be the Mega Art Fair in Milan, which was at the same time as Me Art this year. Esther in New York during Art Week, which went on at the same time. Minor Attractions in London.
I love Minor Attractions.
And I guess so for listeners, the concept being that you take a really interesting space that has some form of architectural significance. So Esther was in the Estonian Mission in New York. It's this incredible old house surrounded by skyscrapers, but probably like 19th century house. And I think Mega was in an abandoned school in the south of Milan, just really cool spaces. And you invite a series of very exciting, mostly younger galleries to go and participate. And then you hang the artworks basically as you see, for their artistic qualities and put them in a place that'll be really interesting. So you use the architecture of the rooms, you place works by different dealers next to each other. And it's the antidote, in my view, to the kind of cubicle Dilbert style art booths that we see at many other fairs.
Another one is, I think it was Art Basel Social Club.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That was another, or was it? It's just Basel Social Club.
Basel Social Club, yeah. But brilliant. But it makes it into a much more, as a visitor, it's incredible. I mean, I loved them. I was at Mega this year. I went to Milan. It's still got brilliant gallery.
Is that kind of like that classic white cube sort of?
Exactly. So Me Art's in the kind of main conference center in Milan. And yeah, brilliant galleries there, great work. But it's exactly what you expect in many ways, with a few exceptional outliers. You go to Mega and there's first night, just a massive party. They're serving Aperol Spritz on tap downstairs for €5. And the work's brilliant. And the dealers are just kind of walking around. You don't have that really foreboding kind of dealer sitting behind the desk with their laptop, don't come talk to me kind of energy.
Oh my God, that is such an energy. I don't want to shit on art fairs because I really probably shouldn't. And some of it has to do with the fact that I've been on the other side of that, right? I've been someone working at a booth on the last day of Freeze. I've worked 8 days straight for 12 hours each day. I am exhausted. But at the same time, I would still get up and go and talk to people. I've seen the sales directors get up and talk to people. And mind you, I've worked at really top tier galleries that are, in my opinion, I hold them in such high regard. So I can't say anything about how they were doing things because I really respect their way of working and the effort that they put in with everyone who came to our booth. But I have experienced it just as someone strolling around, what it feels like to be interested in an artist. And no, I might not be a top tier collector, but I'm still someone in the art world that, could be interesting to work with, even with the gallery, to have chats to. These things can propel you forward, especially okay, come on the podcast, we can do, that is what happened in some of the cases when people spoke to me at various events and various art fairs that I was at, right?
Yeah.
But then as soon as you walk in somewhere, and even if the art is stellar, if someone is so cold and makes you feel so unwanted in this little tiny cubicle, then it really just makes you want to turn around and go to a different booth, no matter how great the art is. Because ultimately, it's not just about the art. When everyone always says it's about the art, we are human beings. If we feel unwelcome somewhere, we will leave something behind that we really, really like. It's just psychological.
Absolutely.
We won't engage with it more.
Not just that, but you have that experience in Brussels or in Basel, wherever, and then you happen to be, I don't know, at another art fair with that same gallery, or you're in a city where that gallery has a space, whatever, that impression sticks with you, right? I would say something that harms their brand as well. So I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think galleries can definitely do better in some cases in that specific area. I think one bit of sympathy I have with them is that as part of what I was talking about earlier, which is this increased pressure on day sales, on, if you're going to an art fair on day 4, day 5, right, when the sales team have been on their feet since the VIP day, talking nonstop, I guess from the gallery's perspective, most of the major buyers, most of the major sales probably have happened right now, right? You might get a magical one on day 6, day 7, but predominant sales are going to have come through by now. And so if it's been a bad year, you're going to feel pretty rubbish. And if it's been a good year, you're going to be pretty relaxed. And again, I think all of these dynamics that push galleries to be so focused on a really small number of people at these fairs who are coming on the first kind of 12 hours of a fair itself, I think this does result in not thinking more widely about how fairs can be a platform for talking more about your program, introducing new audiences who don't... We're constantly talking in the art world about how we need to appeal to new audiences and bring more people in. They're the most amazing instance for that, right? Let's make, I was at art fair in Europe recently where it was like 130 euros if you wanted to come in on the second day. And students I think got a good deal, but where are your collectors in their mid-20s who probably are earning good salaries? That they're not going to be paying that kind of money to come and speculate and see some work, especially if they get in there and then they have a bad experience.
I think that sometimes these tickets are so incredibly expensive that exactly what you just said about these people that are in the middle, they are going to feel so isolated. It is a huge barrier to entry if you have to pay over 100 euros, pounds, dollars, whatever, to get into an art fair. That's actually kind of wild. I personally, if I were not in the art world, but I were an art collector, let's say I was in banking or finance and could afford to collect this art, I still don't know if I would pay that money. And honestly, actually, if we think about it, having been on the other side of that, having been at a gallery, knowing how art fairs work from that angle, a lot of these people, if they have a connection to a gallery, they will get a ticket from the gallery because galleries are allocated a certain amount of tickets to give out. So at least there's that. But if you're someone who wants to take their first little foray into, is foray the right word? Foray into the art world? I don't know. We're going with it. That is something that I think is such a difficult thing. You can't really do that in an art fair. And the whole point of an art fair is to sell. So you want people to come in who might buy, even if it's new audiences, and you're completely cutting them off. And so you're right. It's all of the same people. It's circular the whole time and not circular in a sustainable way.
No,
it's circular in a repetitive, this is not going to work forever kind of way.
Totally. And this is why I'm so excited about these new models, right? So I think what Mega in Milan this year did really well was they really thought about what are galleries looking to us for? Why would they participate? And so they did a few things really differently to other fairs, right? The first part was they had lower overheads, so they didn't charge galleries very much to participate, which obviously galleries love because the risk is low for them. The second part was they, I would say, had a really good division of commercial sales activities that are trying to actually sell the works for the galleries. So right, there's no booths, as I said. The gallerists were there sometimes, but they were also in and around the city going to the Prada Foundation, going to Me Art when it was on. And so the organizing team of the fair actually organized tours of collectors from the region, and they brought them through and they spoke about the work and they platformed it. And they did a huge amount of work to actually support the galleries who were making that investment, bringing their works there, attending. And the final part was they then thought about what's the wider cultural impact and influence this going to have. How can you, not everyone who wants to go to that fair for the first time is going to be suitable for a VIP tour with the fair organizers. How can you create an environment where actually people, like you said, maybe they're first-time art buyers, maybe they're people who have small collections, want to dig deeper. They can come along, they can have that Aperol Spritz. It's not going to break the bank. It's not a kind of $30 glass of champagne, Untitled Miami. Sorry, I'm going to name call them because it's a little ridiculous. Going to get a DM tomorrow saying it's actually 25, don't worry. And you could go have a really exciting experience, enjoy the work, enjoy the cultural programming, enjoy the party. And I just think it's a much better way of trying to bring in new audiences in a way that helps everyone, because for the actual visitors, they're having a great time. For the galleries, they're not expected to take all the risk on.
Yeah.
And to that point, so actually, if I can trail it, at First Thursday, I've been speaking with galleries about art fairs for the past 9 months. And after a few conversations early on, I actually thought it's time to do a bit of a report about this. So we're actually about to release Art Fair report. Hopefully by the time this podcast is released, it will be live.
I'll link it in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you. But one of the big, takes from galleries that we asked for a lot of feedback, was this idea of this imbalance and this idea that actually all of the risk for performance is basically being placed on the gallery. And I think models that think about how you can de-risk that and have a more equitable balance between the fair organizers, between galleries, and between collectors who attend, I think those are the models that are really going to succeed moving forwards, because otherwise we're just going to see more and more galleries say, do you know what, fairs are not for me. And I think even in our report, about a third of the galleries that spoke to me actually said that they were going to do significantly fewer art fairs in future years. So the trend is already starting. And I think if we want to keep this really interesting phenomenon going, we need to think about how to approach it differently.
Yeah, I think that it is really important that art fairs, especially maybe the younger art fairs where these younger galleries are taking a greater risk because they don't have the funds. I mean, of course, blue chip galleries, there's always sort of a question of if there is a sort of risk or not, because you can't really look behind the curtain. You can't really see, like, a lot of people maybe inside could call Marlborough closing, but I think it came to a shock to 90% of the art world, right? And so you can't really look behind the curtain. But for the most part, it's these younger galleries that I'm seeing that last for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, but then they end up closing. And art fairs could be theoretically a great way for them to make their sales, because it is really hard to have the overheads of a brick and mortar space in London. It's so expensive. And so honing in on what you said about the art fair organizers taking on a lot of that and thinking about programming and thinking about engaging these audiences. But thinking about First Thursday, I think that there's an aspect of this personal follow-up. I mean, what's that statistic? I know it probably doesn't really fit too well to the situation, but when it comes to marketing and selling a product or a service, you need to have, I think, what is it?
I know this one. It's 7. You need to do 7 follow-ups.
There's something that someone needs to see it 3 times and then hear of it 7 times or something like that.
Yeah,
it's a 3-7 thing, but exactly that. It's someone needs to hear about it at least 7 times for them to take the plunge to actually purchase.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot about that with Next Gen. I obviously have to think a little bit more business minded. And so with First Thursday, I think this isn't in the questions. I hope that it's okay. I'm kind of veering off a bit. But one of the things that you had brought in is thinking about a more automated way of reaching out to people. And I think that's so incredibly valuable. And maybe we can segue into my next question about AI. But if you want to say anything on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this all ties into this point around galleries having to focus on the booth sales at fairs, right, to justify their continued participation. My view is that fairs are incredible because you're bringing a group of potential buyers into a space and then giving them the circumstances to actually transact, right? When I'm at an art fair, I look at works that I definitely can't afford and go, oh, maybe. Right? It's incredible what those lights and maybe, a glass of something can do in that sort of moment. One of the reasons actually why I built First Thursday in the very beginning was I was working with a series of art galleries who were attending fairs. And I was really fascinated by the fair model, as you can probably tell from the conversation we've had. And I was thinking about analogies from other industries, right? And I've been told by a lot of people, the art world doesn't operate like other industries. It has its own playbooks, whatever. But when I was hearing from these gallerists about how they think about fairs, it felt quite similar. They were saying, we love going to art fairs because we meet new people. And, we pay a lot of money. We pay 30,000, we pay 50,000, whatever to attend. But these buyers could be worth a huge amount to us across their lifespan of collecting. And for me, that sounds like a startup term we used to use called customer lifetime value. It's a horrible word that I would never use in the art world, but thinking about,
you'll get kicked out.
Yes, I'm not going to, maybe we can edit that out. But the idea that, you could go to an art fair and sell nothing and meet one person who maybe will collect from your gallery every year for the next 20 years, and it could all be worth it many times over, right? That for me really fascinated me because that's a really hard thing to do. Right? It's hard enough to bring work to an art fair, have an amazing program and sell something on the booth. To find someone, nurture them, build the relationship and turn them into someone who's really obsessed with your programming, trusts you, that sort of stuff. It's an incredibly hard thing to do. But in my view, the way in which most galleries still go about it is pretty legacy in many ways. So when I was talking to galleries, they would say, oh, well, we meet people in the booth. They tell us they like the work. They don't buy something. We put their name in the book. And this book has become a bit of a totem for me at First Thursday. But it was decided that, galleries would write these names in books. And then when they get back to their original gallery premises, maybe a week after the fair, someone would, as you were saying earlier, would have to type up those names. Maybe they'd check in their database to see if that person was an existing contact. Then they would maybe Google them to see if they are a well-known collector or someone who might be interested in buying. And then they'd try and write them an email. And I also interviewed a lot of collectors at this time. And got told by a lot of collectors there's kind of this wave of emails you get about 7 to 8 days after the VIP day of a fair, right? When everyone's suddenly like, oh, yeah, we should get back to everyone. Okay, let's send them the email with the works that are still available. And in 2025, it's too slow. That's my basic principle. Galleries need to be a lot faster at how they actually make the most of these people who have shown interest, who've gone to a fair. They're already hugely qualified buyers by being in that space. They've shown interest in your program. They've told you all about themselves. You have to act on it. And so with First Thursday, I'm trying to cut out all of the manual tasks, admin excuses, right? Which I think galleries do make because of how hard it is to do that really well, so that they can get back to people with the right information at the right time and really maximize that return on investment that they're getting from spending those tens or hundreds of thousands of going to these fairs.
Yeah. And so my next question is about artificial intelligence, because it's a very, very contested topic. It is here to stay. And I do think that either you kind of get your head around the ways that it could potentially be useful to you and your business, or you will lag behind or avoid it for lack of understanding. And I think that there are certain limits to what I would like to use AI for, what I can use AI for in my life, because I've noticed that like it could never replace how I write, how I put things together, how I think. And also writing is thinking, it's processing. And so for me, like I wouldn't replace my writing with that, for example, or anything like that. But there are certain things that I'm like, oh yeah, this is really useful for these 3 particular things in my life to make it faster, to get through the nitty gritty so that I can do the creative bits. This is what I'm doing. Anyway, that's kind of me having a roundabout way of touching on this topic. Can you tell me how you implement AI? And let's demystify all of that a little bit for people listening in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would say this is someone who runs, I guess, what you could call an AI company. I think a lot of what we hear about AI and technology at the moment is a lot of hot air, really. I'm willing to go on the record saying that. I think it's similar to, well, you can look back at the dot-com bubble, right? Late 90s, early 2000s, and what happened afterwards, right? Everyone thought that the internet was going to be absolutely transformative in 98, 99. It was going to accelerate things at a crazy rate, and that all these companies that were being funded at that period that eventually would crash were going to be the ones to take us forward. That didn't happen, but look where we are today, 15, 20 years on at least and further, like it's completely transformed the way that we exist as human beings on this planet. And I think we'll see something similar with AI. I think the capabilities of AI to transform business processes or things in the art world or anything, I think have been slightly overstated, but I think they're going to become, as you say, like an intrinsic part of how we operate.
Like a tool, like as we would use Google.
Exactly.
My mom, she tells me that when she was going to university, she literally just had to go to the library and look at the encyclopedia.
Totally.
And I was like, oh, I'm just going to Google it. And she was like, yeah, we didn't have that back then. And so thinking about it like that as well, if we consider.
I agree. So I think a good test for me on AI is this going to make me, maybe it's not good framing, but is this going to make me lazier? So think about this kind of, I don't remember phone numbers anymore because they're on my mobile phone, or I can Google people or whatever. I want to make sure that when I'm using AI, it's not actively de-skilling me for the things I care about. So for your point, right? If you're using AI to write everything, your actual writing skills are going to be depleted faster than anything, right? I've even seen some studies about how it's already starting to shrink our brains, which is terrifying. I'm a strong believer that AI in its current state with its current capabilities should really be about enabling us rather than replacing us. And a big part of this at First Thursday is thinking about what are the very monotonous, repetitive, but consistent tasks that galleries and gallery staff complete on a regular basis that we can train something else to do to support us. And so for me, my biggest principle is how can I free up teams in galleries to focus on things that are actually going to help that gallery to grow or survive or do better instead of trying to read someone's handwriting or instead of typing up notes or running endless Google searches. And
yeah, exactly. So these gallery assistants who are sitting there, as you just said, typing things into the database, trying to see if someone already exists, trying to find their first name because all you've got is A. Smith, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Which, and then, okay, by email, because you don't know who A. Smith is. You might never find them. And then that might be a potential collector lost.
Exactly. Or that could be the collector who's going to make you $1 million over the next 10 years, but you got one of the letters wrong because you couldn't read their cursive handwriting or whatever. So I think there are lots of ways which can be used there. And then just as a quick aside, I think also I have friends who did internships at art galleries and friends who did internships in other industries. And the level of work and learning and development that you do at galleries is significantly, I would say, below what you would do in other industries as well, right? If you're an intern in an art gallery, you're doing data crunching, you're entering data manually, you're kind of writing things on paper, you're doing a lot of grunt work, right? And you're told you need to do this so that you can get to the next level and you can finally be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And that just doesn't happen in other industries. I think it's a real throwback to kind of earlier forms of internships.
Really?
My strong belief is that if we can enable those tasks to be automated, actually these people in those early career positions can be given work that's actually going to be revenue generating. It's actually going to be helping them to engage with new clients who the gallery hasn't met before. It's going to be helping them to find artists who they didn't know they could show. There are so many opportunities when you actually pull out the jobs to be done that are just so critical to the gallery's success. So, but yeah, specifically about how we use AI at First Thursday, we use it, I guess, in two key ways. The first part is to take some of those very basic tasks that are being done by gallery assistants. So one of them is helping galleries to run research. If they've met someone to really understand, are they a known collector? Have they written about their collection online? All public information, stuff that the teams would be doing themselves, but we can do it much faster. And we can also do it right at the moment of the meet. So it means when you're on that art fair booth, you can actually very quickly understand who you've had an interaction with, instead of having to wait 2 weeks where that information is going to be a lot less valuable. We can also do it for a lot less money because it's very quick and it's an easy series of searches. The second area, I think, is where I'm really excited about moving forwards, which is most galleries are sitting on what I view as treasure troves of data. I ran a very quick kind of a straw poll of galleries in London a few months back and estimated very roughly that for a typical mid-sized gallery in London that's been around for, say, 10 years, is sitting on about 1.2 million unique data points. And so these could be things like someone's historical purchase history, it could be where they live, it could be their email, but a huge amount of data that's very, very hard to sift through. And the typical practice I see in galleries is they kind of bank the historical data. If a collector isn't raising their hand actively, they're kind of left in this vault. And then they will only focus on the new people they meet and the people who are really actively engaging with the gallery and its program. And my view is that there's a huge amount of lost value that's sitting in these databases. The problem is to get someone to actually go through that database and make sense of it would cost an unbelievable amount of money, human hours, and probably be one of the most mind-numbing tasks you could do in your life. And so this is a really great application for AI because we can say, these are the things we really care about. These are the patterns we like to see from people who might be interested in collecting. These are the backgrounds we really like. These are the areas we can enrich this information. And in doing so, we can take an incredibly valuable set of data that's kind of dormant, work that has maybe taken a decade of attending art fairs, millions of pounds of investment in travel, in programming, all of that, and we can bring it alive again. And this for me is like how we're going to help galleries get through this difficult period. This is how we're going to basically help them to make the most of all those investments they've made to date and think about how they both work on historical contacts and also those that they're meeting afresh.
Yeah. I was really impressed when we put my name into your database. And obviously I'm plastered all over the internet. It would be very hilarious if it didn't find a bunch of information on me. But I just remember when it automatically filled out my bio that it had taken from my website. I think, did it even provide a photo? I'm not sure.
Not quite yet, but
not quite
looking
yet.
At it.
That'll come. I have no doubt, Callum. But then there was I don't know if I could say it, if you want me to say this, but there was the rating on how likely it is that I would buy art. And it said quite unlikely because I work in the arts and so my salary is not high. And I was like, oh, I feel so called out right now, but it's not wrong.
Well, the AI can be sassy sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a particularly interesting, I think, use case of AI to maybe talk about, because I think there's a lot of understandable fear about profiling, about scoring, about algorithms, that sort of stuff. And I want to be clear, this is absolutely not what First Thursday is trying to do in any way. What we're doing instead is trying to help galleries to talk about what they really care about from buyers or collectors or institutional partners, and then help them to make sense of these large data sets in light of that. So this is not some kind of secret brain that's going around and giving people numbers. Instead, what it does is the gallery will actually submit a pretty rich description of who they really want to meet, what sort of audience is really special to them. So they might actually be, trying to attract, well-known podcasters and art historians, and you would get a perfect 100.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, thank you. But that's exactly it, is that yes, this particular scoring thing was more based on what it thinks the likelihood of a possible sale could be.
Exactly.
However, galleries are so much more than art sales.
Yeah.
Galleries support institutional exhibitions. They want to engage curators. They want to talk to art historians. They want to collaborate with podcasters. They want to get their artists on A Brush With, by Ben Luke in the art newspaper. They want to be doing that. That is a goal for them. And so what sales directors are doing, they aren't just sales directors. They want to meet these key players And the galleries have so much more to do within the ecosystem than just selling to collectors. Like that would be a misconception from someone coming into the industry, you know?
Totally. And this is, bring it back to one of my first learnings about how fundamentally relationship driven this industry is, right? Relationships and context are absolutely everything. And I think the final bit that I find most interesting here, I guess, is that when you talk to people who work in galleries, when you talk to sales directors, like the most common vibe I get, or maybe even a bit of feedback, is like, I'm exhausted, right? I've just had like an insane week. I've worked 7 days. I have to go on Saturday. I have a friend who works in a gallery, and they, we're at the pub on Friday, and they're like, oh, tomorrow morning I'm going into the gallery, for an extra day that I'm not paid for, or whatever. It's an incredibly taxing job. You're being pulled in so many directions. You have so many different responsibilities. And so, yes, we can say idealistically, galleries should give everyone their full attention, roll out the red carpet, whatever. But fundamentally, they have to focus on those that they think are going to be the most promising or interesting, or across whatever strata or subsection you want to look at, right? Podcasters or buyers or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of trying to think about how tools and systems can help galleries to make judgments about where they focus that attention, because that's not going to grow, right? You're not suddenly going to have an extra 40 hours in a week to go to the house of every single person who's ever joined your mailing list. But maybe there are kind of 10 or 15 that you should go and actually like speak to in person, or call up, or send that artwork because it's an artist they loved at Basel 5 years ago, or whatever.
Yeah. And what are some of the challenges that you faced in the industry so far? Because I know when you went and spoke to the Sotheby's Institute of Art students, you held a talk for Joe Dunning's class, and it was called something like a tech startup for a tech-phobic industry. And I have to say, shout out to Joe for inspiring the title of this podcast episode, because that's what it's going to be. Has that been a barrier for you in comparison to other industries, do you feel?
Definitely. I mean, I think I knew coming in that the art world was not going to be like many of the startup ecosystems I've been in, and that I was going to have to approach this very differently. I think I underestimated how different it would be on so many different levels. Like so many of the signals or gut feels that you get from working somewhere for a long time just don't really apply. I think there are two really key differences that have been really, I guess, meaningful to understand, and that have really guided how I've gone about building this business. I think the first one is that it's not a tech-first industry. And we all know that, right? This is not like a brand new bit of news. But the result of that is that most people don't, well, some people might write to me and say they do love tech, but most people don't like tech and they don't want it, right? If they could do their job without the use of software, without the use of these platforms, and do it just well, I'm sure a lot of arts professionals would be like, I just want to focus on programming, on meeting artists, on liaison, on all that, on relationship building. All that
Give me a typewriter and a paintbrush.
Well, exactly. I mean, I would say the number of times people say, I initially used to pitch my product as like a replacement for your moleskin notebook at your art fair.
Oh yeah, that's not going to get you far.
And then the number of, not only the number of times I would have people say, but I love that book.
I would say the same thing. I could literally reach over, well, my bag's not here, but I could literally show you my moleskin calendar.
Yeah.
But then what I do is, so funny. I'm very I love my handwritten leather, little calendar. And I color code everything. Anyway, what I do is every Saturday or Sunday, I sit down and I put everything for the upcoming week into my Google Calendar, and I time block things, and I put little tasks in between, and I make it much more exact. And that's how technology helps me manage my time in a very precise way.
Yeah.
Whereas my moleskin, I scribble in it, and it's a first dump of everything I'm doing, and then I refine it through technology. And maybe that's a moderately okay analogy for this.
The point I'm trying to make it here, I guess, is that there's a level of resistance to technology, which I think is born out of the dynamics of the industry, how things have been done historically, right? The number of times I've been told, well, that's just how things have been done, so this is how we'll continue.
Yeah.
But also I think it's because actually there are some really excellent tech products out there, but galleries have also been pushed a lot to adopt technology over the last 15, 20 years. And I think back to, I remember, in the kind of mid-2010s, trying to look at galleries on websites, and most galleries didn't have websites, or a lot of them didn't. And you now go post-pandemic, and if you're not online, you basically don't exist. It's just not even a thing. And so I think a lot of galleries have had potentially negative experiences adopting tech platforms, adopting software that's maybe a little bit older, that sort of stuff, and the impact that's had on their operations. So I've had to really think about, how do you, in a way, do what you do with your moleskin notebook? Show them, well, we can keep your workflows, we can keep how you operate. There are some small parts we can accelerate, and that'll make a real difference to you. Yeah. And it's a very different sort of storytelling and an approach to building a company versus, if you're an AI startup trying to sell image generation so you can make your... So that's the first one. The second main challenge, I would say, is that the art industry is very, very slow. And I think this is something I've had to get used to. And I'm almost at the point where I'm enjoying it, which I would not have said a few months ago. But what I mean by this is, on a very practical level, customers take a while to decide if they want to use your product. Customers take a while to reply to your emails. There's just a very different attitude to a lot of the markers of commerce that I've seen in other industries, which I think are also powered by how collector-dealer relationships operate as well. And I think part of that is it means you have to think a lot more long-term about the investments you're making as a business, about how you want the product to evolve, and also not to be disheartened if things don't happen right away. Like I remember I was in Miami last December and I was doing my first series of pilots for this product. And I had, at this point, was still using lots of my tech playbook. And I'd given my product to a few galleries for free and said, it was a very, very early version. I said, you should use it at the fair and tell me what you think. And I flew all the way to Miami and I got there and no one used it. And I was totally crestfallen. I was thinking, well, maybe it's just not going to work. Maybe no one likes this product. Maybe it doesn't solve any issues for this industry, all this sort of stuff.
And you flew to Miami on your own dime, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was, a very crushing moment. That flight back was pretty depressing. And I then reflected over the Christmas period on what had really happened there and learned a lot, right? I did lots of things wrong. I gave the gallery the product the morning of the art fair. I didn't give them any training. I presumed that they'd know how to use it immediately because I knew how to use it because I built it. I hadn't thought about what the workflow on the booth might be. I hadn't thought that they might be quite stressed on the first day of the art fair. I hadn't thought that the Wi-Fi might go down for 2 hours and that maybe one of them would try it, not be able to get in and then think it's too risky. Like all these things that are just like very industry specific pieces. And I'm so glad I didn't give up at that point because I then went to Singapore in January. I thought I'll do one more, give it a second go, and had a few galleries there, crucially paying me this time. And it was incredible. Like the leads were flowing in. I'd spent the time on training the teams. I'd reworked the entire workflow of the product so it actually fit with how galleries were operating on the booth. And I was walking around other galleries, getting to go and see the product being used. And they're saying, this is incredible. Let's do, I want to do a demo. I want to see more about this. And I can just see that the difference in, the light and day that came from being a bit patient and not doing, I think, what we do too often in more startup circles, which is to say, let's give it one test. And if it fails, pivot, change, do something different.
Iterate.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the mindset. It's like, well, move fast and break things, blah, 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 which just does not apply in this industry. So, yeah.
I think that is really interesting because what I'm hearing through this is not only learning how to be patient or learning that patience is something that's incredibly valued and will get you far in this industry. I always say when kind of young professionals come to me and they want a piece of advice, one of the things that I do always say is no matter what you do, you are planting seeds. And sometimes in my little metaphor, you plant a seed and it grows into a little sprout and you water it and then it slowly grows into a nice, beautiful plant over the next couple of years. Sometimes you plant a seed and it shoots up and grows into this huge oak tree. All of a sudden, you gave it barely any water and it just turned into this big thing. And then sometimes you have a seed and you plant it and you water it and you water it and you water it and it dies because you overwatered it and it just isn't growing. It never was going to grow. It's not the type of soil that it needed, And that's sort of how I like to see different relationships. And sometimes you need that patience, but you also, what you did, what I'm hearing, is that you didn't give up. You stayed incredibly persistent. Did you go to those same galleries and say, can you try it again? Or was it like a whole new batch of different galleries? You were like, let's try this with a new class.
It was a little bit of both. And I think it really came out of, I think something that tech often ends up doing either by accident or by design, which is I think tech has sometimes a bit of a like messiah complex. It believes that it can come in and solve big problems in underlooked industries and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of people build products by just saying, I think I know how to do this better. I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm just going to go and do it. And then they'll buy it. And I really can't think of many examples where that's played out well.
Yeah.
And I think my learning after that first, I did spend a lot of time with galleries on that first version of the product, but it wasn't quite ready yet. That was my fundamental learning. And I'm so glad that I decided then to say, okay, what I'm going to do is really try and figure out what went wrong. What are these steps? Why didn't, and very thankfully those galleries who didn't use it, they did do an interview with me afterwards and they told me. And I was patient. I said, why didn't you? And they gave me all the reasons. I thought, how can I actually preempt these? How can I solve these problems ahead of time? And how can I do it in a way that's going to fit in with how they want to operate? Because the last thing that a gallery wants is some upstart bringing a product that's going to slow them down on the VIP day of a major art fair, right? And so taking all those learnings in, really going back to basics, really thinking about something I'm very, very passionate about, which is, what are the actual jobs to be done? What are the repetitive elements, tasks done by the people on the booth? how do they act, and really almost treating it almost like kind of an anthropological exercise. And by really getting to the close quarters of that, I think I was able to build something a lot more effective.
Yeah.
And then once I was able to cut through, that's when it's been an amazing kind of year since then.
Yeah. And because First Thursday is very much still in its infancy, I mean, it's like 1.5 years old. It's not even a toddler yet, like just a baby. I would love to ask you about your vision for the next year, maybe even the next 5 years, maybe even your long-term vision for the company. If you can say it, because obviously like things change all the time because of how much you learn
of course.
As well.
Of course.
So I get that.
So I think in the short term, I'm very much going to stay building quietly, closely with my existing customers, with people who talk to me. I want to build products that solve real problems. And the only way to do that is to basically take advantage of everything that I have, which is being small, relatively unknown still at the stage, and willing to build things for specific galleries and really learn from their processes. There are huge advantages of being a massive company with many customers and stuff, but I think the thing you can't do is be that close to the actual end user and be almost kind of like customer obsessed at that point. And by the end of this year, like I want to continue doing what First Thursday has already started, which is giving weeks of time back to teams, giving some of our customers are basically saving a month's worth of admin work at this point, just by using this kind of digital tooling. And we'll start to see the impacts of that on other parts of the business. They're now spending more time going back to historical collectors they might invite to events. They're now spending more time thinking about their programming, about curation, all those different parts. But I'm really excited to see what impact that has in the short term. In the, I guess, medium term, I really want to see First Thursday become like a critical part of how galleries think about navigating this really tricky period in the art world, which I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. Right? The wider macroeconomic environment's not going to allow for it.
Boo.
I know, there we are. But so I would love to see First Thursday become like a really crucial part of galleries' tooling and their arsenal for how they make the most of all the work they've done for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and how they make the most out of every investment they make, whether that's paying for an online marketplace, spending hundreds of thousands a year on fairs. How can they make sure that every single part of that is being pushed towards the right things? And then, I don't know, longer term, who knows? I think the thing I really don't want to lose is that closeness with the end user. And I think that's what's kept me going through all these, at those moments when, I thought I was going to stop because I got, like my Miami experience, whatever. It was those people who work in the galleries that I've been testing with who said, no, you are onto something. There is something here. You're solving our problems. Just try again. Like those are the people who kept me going. And I just want to make sure I never lose that.
You really need those people, I think. And no matter what you do, like I'm not running an art tech startup, but, running my own projects and things like that. I think that sometimes it can be so isolating when things aren't going well. And it's so hard to get through that sometimes because you just want to throw in the towel sometimes.
Yeah.
You just want to be like, mate, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's understandable.
And I think one of the interesting parts is that it never really goes away. There's always something to be worried about or something that you think is going to go wrong. But you get through it.
Alas. Was Miami where you paid $25/$30 for the glass of champagne?
Yes. Yeah, it was a sad.
Oh, so we just boo to Miami.
I know, exactly. Will I go this year? Who knows?
Probably.
Yes, probably.
Like, am I still like chained to this? Yes.
Well, I kind of, I want to do it right now. I've had the bad experience, and now I need to.
You got to rectify. Yeah, let's redefine it. Okay, well, Callum, finally, a fun question to end the episode that I like to ask all of my guests. If you could have dinner with one artist from art history, who would it be and why?
So I've thought long and hard about this one, and I've decided it'd be Alice Neal. I didn't really know Alice Neal's work that much until a few years ago, and I went to the retrospective they had at the Barbican, which I thought was just like totally phenomenal. I just went back twice in the end because I thought it was so brilliant. And I then, about 3-4 months after that exhibition, I just quit my job actually to start First Thursday. And I took a train from Los Angeles to New Orleans in the US, which to any American listeners, no one seems to know exists, but it was brilliant. And I stopped off in many towns along the way there and often went to the art museums, and actually works from that exhibition were then hanging in these individual collections. And I felt kind of like I was like following Alice Neal across the US-Mexico border. It's quite special. And I just think, her ability to, her portrait's just totally phenomenal. My family, I come from a line of portrait painters. Yeah,
you mentioned your dad as a portrait painter at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, so my dad paints portraits for years, and his family also have a lot of artists there as well. And grew up looking through books of like Singer Sargent and Velasquez, like all that sort of stuff. So I feel very attracted to that, I guess, medium and type of work. But yeah, I think we'd have an amazing conversation.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Callum, for sharing your insights and your experiences and for telling us more about First Thursday.
Of course, it's been a real pleasure.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.